4,000 meters beneath the Pacific, an autonomous underwater vehicle captures something that should not exist. The sonar signature is unmistakable. An aircraft, largely intact, rests on the abyssal plain where no flight path has ever been recorded. When the ROV descends with cameras, what they find is a machine that appears in no loss records, matches no known disappearance, and carries markings that 3 governments have refused to explain. For 6 months, researchers have been mapping every rivet of this ghost. And what the scans reveal is more disturbing than any crash. This aircraft was modified for a mission that no one will discuss. And whatever it carried into the deep is still down there, waiting. The discovery. The announcement came in March of 2024, buried in an academic journal that most people would never read. A research team from the Schmidt Ocean Institute, conducting routine seafloor mapping in the Central Pacific, had detected an anomaly at a depth of 4,100 meters. The location was roughly 1,500 kilometers southeast of Midway Atoll, in international waters that see almost no surface traffic and had never been systematically surveyed. The team was not looking for aircraft. They were mapping underwater volcanic features and studying deep-sea ecosystems. But the multi-beam sonar does not lie. Something large and geometric sat on the seafloor where nothing should be. The initial sonar pass showed an object approximately 30 meters long with a wingspan of roughly 40 meters. The shape was distinctive. Fuselage, wings, tail section. An aircraft. But the depth was wrong. 4 kilometers down is beyond the crush depth of any pressurized fuselage. Anything that reached the bottom from that altitude should have been compressed into fragments. This wreck was largely intact. The decision to deploy the remotely operated vehicle, or ROV, took 2 days. The team checked their sonar data against known wreck databases. They searched historical flight records for the region. They contacted aviation archaeologists and military historians. Nothing matched. No aircraft had been reported missing in that location. No World War II loss fit the profile. No Cold War incident corresponded to the coordinates. The wreck was not in any catalog. On March 19th, the remotely operated vehicle descended into the abyss. At 4,000 meters, the water pressure exceeds 400 atmospheres. The temperature hovers near freezing. No light has reached this depth in millions of years. The remotely operated vehicle's floodlights cut through absolute darkness, and the cameras captured what the sonar had promised. The aircraft rested upright on the sediment, nose slightly down, as if it had made a controlled water landing before sinking. The wings were intact. The tail section showed damage but remained attached. The fuselage had not imploded. Somehow, the structure had survived a descent that should have crumpled it like an aluminum can. The footage showed corrosion, marine growth, and damage consistent with decades on the ocean floor. But it also showed something else: modifications. The aircraft had been extensively altered from whatever its original configuration had been. External hardpoints did not match any standard military loadout. Reinforced belly plating suggested armor or shielding. And most disturbingly, all identification markings had been removed. No tail number. No national insignia. No manufacturer's data plate. Every surface where an identifier should have been was either ground smooth or covered with blank metal patches welded over the original markings. The aircraft had been deliberately anonymized, and it had been done before the crash, not after. The remotely operated vehicle circled the wreck for 6 hours, capturing high-definition video and sonar scans from every angle. The team documented the entire structure, the damage patterns, the modification points. They recorded measurements and took sediment samples from around the site. And when they reviewed the footage on the surface, the same question kept coming up. What kind of aircraft loses all identification before it flies? Why would any nation go to such lengths to ensure it could never be traced? The Schmidt Ocean Institute released a brief statement confirming the discovery. The coordinates were not made public. The video was classified as proprietary research data. When journalists reached out to military aviation experts for comment, the responses were uniform. No one had any idea what it was, or if they did, they were not saying. What we know and what we don't. The three-dimensional photogrammetric model created from the remotely operated vehicle footage gave researchers their first real chance to analyze the aircraft. The measurements were precise. Length, 32.4 meters. Wingspan, 41.6 meters. Fuselage diameter, 3.8 meters. These dimensions place the aircraft in the category of medium to large military transports or bombers. The general configuration suggested a design from the 1950s or the 1960s. Straight wings, conventional tail, 4-engine mounts, but the specific details matched nothing in the databases. Aviation archaeologists ran the specifications through every known aircraft type from that era. American transports like the C-130 and the C-141 were too large. Soviet designs like the Antonov 12 were close, but had different wing configurations. British and French aircraft of the period did not match the engine placement. The proportions were wrong for a bomber. The wing loading was too heavy for a patrol aircraft. Every comparison came back inconclusive. The engine nacelles provided the next clue. Remotely operated vehicle footage showed 4 turboprop engines, but the nacelle design did not correspond to any production engine from the United States, the Soviet Union, or European manufacturers. The cooling intakes were positioned differently. The exhaust configuration was unique. One analyst suggested the engines might be custom-built or heavily modified versions of existing designs. Another pointed out that several classified military programs in the 1960s had used engines that were never documented in public records. If the aircraft came from a black program, the engines might simply not exist in any database. The cargo bay was visible through several breaches in the fuselage. The interior space was large, reinforced, and showed evidence of specialized fittings that had been removed or destroyed. Whatever the aircraft had been designed to carry, it was not standard cargo. The floor had tie-down points and configurations that did not match military transport standards. The walls showed mounting brackets for equipment that was no longer present. And in several locations, the structure had been reinforced with additional framing that suggested heavy loads or high-value payloads. This cargo was clearly unusual. The tail section provided the most frustrating evidence. Aircraft tail numbers are typically painted or riveted onto the vertical stabilizer. On this wreck, the entire section where the number should have been had been replaced with a smooth metal panel, not painted over, not scratched off, replaced. Someone had taken the time to remove the original panel and install a blank one before the aircraft ever flew its final mission. The same treatment had been applied to every other identification surface. Wing markings, fuselage numbers, manufacturer plates. All removed, all replaced with featureless metal. The serial number problem became the central mystery. Every aircraft ever built has a serial number stamped into the airframe in multiple locations. These numbers are permanent, intended to survive crashes, and allow investigators to identify wreckage. On this aircraft, researchers found 7 locations where serial numbers should have been stamped. All 7 had been ground down, filled, and restamped with meaningless sequences of characters. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure this aircraft could never be traced. The serial numbers had been erased. Database searches confirmed what everyone suspected. The United States Air Force, Navy, and Coast Guard had no missing aircraft that matched the description. The Soviet Union's declassified loss records showed nothing. Britain, France, Australia, Japan, China. Every nation with aviation capabilities in the Pacific during the relevant time period came back with the same answer. This aircraft did not belong to them. Or if it did, they had no record of losing it. The answer was none. The age of the wreck added another layer of uncertainty. Marine biologists examined the growth patterns of organisms colonizing the hull. The corrosion rates suggested the aircraft had been submerged for at least 50 to 70 years. The sediment accumulation around the landing gear indicated it had been on the bottom since the 1950s or 60s. But without serial numbers, without markings, without any official record of the loss, dating the wreck precisely was impossible. What investigators did know was this: the aircraft was a custom-built or heavily modified military transport. It had been deliberately stripped of all identification before its final flight. It had carried something important enough to justify extensive structural modifications, and it had gone down in one of the most remote stretches of the Pacific, far from any documented flight corridors or operational areas. Every detail suggested a classified mission, and the fact that no government would claim the wreck suggested the mission was still classified 70 years later. The Pacific's hidden graveyard. The Central Pacific is littered with the debris of 20th century conflict. During World War II, thousands of aircraft went down in these waters. American bombers limped home from raids on Japanese-held islands. Japanese patrol planes were lost to mechanical failure or to Allied fighters. Search and rescue aircraft vanished while looking for downed crews. The ocean swallowed them all, and most were never found. The Battle of Midway alone accounted for over 200 aircraft lost in a matter of days. Torpedo bombers were shot down on their attack runs. Dive bombers ran out of fuel while searching for carriers. Fighters ditched when their carriers were sunk. Some of these wrecks have been located in recent years. Most never will be. The Pacific is vast and aircraft wreckage is small. Even with modern sonar and autonomous vehicles, finding a specific plane in an area the size of a continent is nearly impossible. The Cold War added another layer of loss. American reconnaissance flights along the Soviet coast. Soviet long-range patrols probed American defenses. Aircraft on classified missions that were never publicly acknowledged. Some vanished into the ocean and were written off in reports that remained secret for decades. Others were lost and never reported at all, because admitting the loss would reveal the existence of the operation. In 1962, an American RB-47 reconnaissance aircraft disappeared over the Bering Sea after being shot down by Soviet fighters. The crew was never recovered. The wreck was never found. In 1969, an American Navy EC-121 electronic surveillance aircraft was shot down by North Korean fighters over the Sea of Japan. 31 crew members died. The wreck sank in water too deep to recover. In 1977, a Soviet Tu-16 bomber went down in the Pacific under circumstances that remain classified. The list goes on. But this newly discovered wreck does not fit any of those known losses. The location is wrong. The aircraft type is wrong. The modifications are wrong. And the deliberate removal of identification markers sets it apart from every documented case. When aircraft go down on military operations, the goal is always to recover them or at least confirm their fate. Nations spend millions searching for lost crews and sensitive equipment. They do not erase identification markers before a mission and then pretend the aircraft never existed. The depth of the wreck eliminates certain possibilities. At 4,000 meters, the pressure would crush any human remains beyond recognition. If the crew ejected or survived the water landing, they would not have been in the aircraft when it sank. The depth also makes recovery prohibitively expensive. Raising a wreck from that depth would cost tens of millions of dollars and require specialized equipment that only a handful of organizations possess. For a 70-year-old aircraft with no identification, no government is going to justify that expense. That raises an uncomfortable question. If recovery is impossible, why not just admit what it is? The silence from military archives is deafening. When researchers formally requested information from the United States Department of Defense, they received a response stating that no records matching the wreck's description could be located. The request was not denied. It was answered with an absence. We have no record of this aircraft. The Soviet archives, now partially accessible through Russian Federation databases, showed the same result. No match, no record. No comment. When British and French military historians were consulted, they confirmed that no European nation had operated aircraft of that configuration in the Pacific during the relevant time period. The Pacific Ocean covers 64 million square miles. It contains some of the deepest trenches and most remote waters on Earth. Aircraft have been disappearing into those depths for a century. Most will never be found. But the ones that are found, the ones that researchers can document and identify, always belong to someone. There is always a nation willing to say, yes, that was ours. Except this time. This time, the wreck sits in international waters, documented in exquisite detail, and no one will claim it. Which means either no one knows what it is, or everyone who does know has been ordered to stay silent. The forensic investigation. Artificial intelligence-enhanced imaging systems transformed the investigation. The initial remotely operated vehicle footage had captured the exterior of the aircraft in high definition. When researchers applied advanced photogrammetric processing and machine learning algorithms to the data, details emerged that human observers had missed. The three-dimensional model revealed stress patterns in the airframe, fracture lines in specific locations, and deformation that suggested the aircraft had not simply crashed. It had been subjected to forces that standard flight operations could not explain. The wing roots showed unusual reinforcement. Structural members had been added that were not part of any standard design. The beefed-up framing suggested the aircraft had been designed to carry wing-mounted stores far heavier than its original specifications allowed. But the hardpoints themselves did not match any known weapons pylons. They were custom fabricated. One analyst suggested they might have been designed to carry external fuel tanks for extreme range missions. Another thought they looked more like mounts for surveillance equipment or electronic warfare pods. Without access to the actual hardware, the purpose remained speculative. The fuselage showed similar modifications. At multiple points along the hull, panels had been replaced with thicker gauge metal. The reinforcements clustered around the cargo bay and the area just aft of the cockpit. This suggested shielding, either to protect the structure from external damage or to contain something inside the aircraft that posed a danger to the crew. Radiation shielding was one possibility. Explosive cargo was another. The thickness of the plating suggested something more serious than routine armor. The cargo bay itself was the most revealing section. The remotely operated vehicle had captured footage through several breaches in the fuselage, and the interior showed signs of a fire or explosion. Blackened metal, warped structural members, damage that originated from inside the aircraft rather than from impact with the water. Something had gone wrong before the crash. Something had burned or detonated in the cargo hold, and whatever it was had compromised the aircraft enough to bring it down. Then, the radiation readings came back. The remotely operated vehicle had been equipped with a basic gamma-ray spectrometer as part of its standard sensor suite. The device is normally used to study volcanic activity and mineral deposits on the seafloor. But when the data from the aircraft wreck was processed, the readings showed an anomaly. The readings showed low-level gamma radiation, consistent with residual contamination from radioactive materials. The levels were not dangerous. 70 years of decay and dispersion had reduced whatever had been present to trace amounts. But the signature was unmistakable. This aircraft had carried something radioactive. The implications sent researchers scrambling for explanations. During the Cold War, several nations experimented with nuclear-powered aircraft engines. The United States had projects like the Aircraft Nuclear Propulsion Program in the 1950s. The Soviet Union had similar research. But none of those programs ever produced operational aircraft. The engines were too heavy, too dangerous, and too impractical. This wreck showed no evidence of a nuclear reactor. The radiation signature was coming from the cargo bay, not the engines. The other possibility was weapons. In the 1950s and 60s, nuclear weapons were transported by air on a regular basis. Strategic bombers carried them on patrol missions. Transport aircraft moved them between bases. Accidents happened. In 1966, a United States Air Force B-52 collided with a tanker over Spain and dropped 4 hydrogen bombs. 3 were recovered. 1 is still missing in the Mediterranean. In 1968, another B-52 crashed in Greenland carrying 4 nuclear weapons. The bombs were not armed, but the crash scattered radioactive plutonium across the ice. Could this Pacific wreck be another Broken Arrow incident? The term Broken Arrow refers to accidents involving nuclear weapons. The United States government has publicly acknowledged 32 such incidents. The actual number is believed to be higher because not all cases were declassified. If this aircraft was carrying nuclear material, and if it went down during a classified mission, the government might have decided that acknowledging the loss would cause more problems than staying silent. But the radiation levels did not quite match weapons-grade material. The decay signature suggested something with a shorter half-life, possibly isotopes used in scientific research or medical applications. It could also have been materials being transported for weapons development that were not yet in bomb form. The spectrometer data was too limited to be conclusive. A direct sampling mission would be required to identify the exact isotopes, and no one was volunteering to fund that mission. The sealed containers added to the mystery. The cargo bay footage showed at least 3 cylindrical objects, each roughly 2 meters long and half a meter in diameter. The containers were heavily corroded, but still intact. Their shape and construction suggested pressure vessels or containment units designed to protect contents from the external environment. They had been lashed to the cargo floor with heavy-duty straps that had partially disintegrated. One container had broken free and lay on its side against the aft bulkhead. The others remained in place. What was inside those containers? Researchers could only guess. The radiation readings suggested nuclear materials. The modifications to the aircraft suggested a high-value payload. The classified nature of the mission suggested something that multiple nations would prefer remained on the ocean floor. And the fact that no one would claim the aircraft suggested that whatever it carried, it was something no government wanted to take responsibility for. The environmental question became unavoidable. If the wreck contained radioactive materials, was it leaking into the surrounding ocean? The initial readings suggested only trace contamination, but the containers had been underwater for 70 years. Corrosion had breached the cargo bay. If the containment vessels failed, whatever was inside could spread across the seafloor and enter the food chain. The depth provided some protection. At 4,000 meters, the wreck sits below the thermocline and well below the productive surface layers where most marine life exists. But deep-sea organisms do exist at those depths, and radioactive isotopes can bioaccumulate in fish, concentrate in tissues, and eventually work their way up to species consumed by humans. The Schmidt Ocean Institute quietly consulted with environmental agencies and nuclear safety experts. The consensus was that the levels detected did not pose an immediate threat. Monitoring would be needed. If the containers showed signs of failing, a decision would have to be made about intervention, which brought the researchers back to the fundamental problem. No one would claim the wreck. No one would take responsibility. Without a nation willing to fund recovery or remediation, the aircraft would stay where it was, slowly corroding, slowly releasing whatever secrets it carried, while the ocean kept the evidence out of reach. What still lies in the cargo hold? The decision was made within weeks of the discovery. The wreck would not be recovered. The cost was too high. The legal complications were too complex, and the nations that might have jurisdiction over the aircraft were not interested in claiming it. The Schmidt Ocean Institute documented the site, archived the data, and moved on to other projects. The coordinates remain classified. The footage is stored in research databases accessible only to approved scientists. The aircraft sits on the ocean floor, slowly corroding, while the world above pretends it does not exist. But the question of what remains inside the cargo hold has not gone away. The radiation signature confirmed that something radioactive was aboard when the aircraft went down. The sealed containers suggest that whatever it was had been carefully packaged for transport. The modifications to the aircraft suggest the payload was valuable enough to justify extensive custom work. And the removal of all identification markers suggests someone wanted to ensure that if the mission failed, the aircraft could never be traced back to its origin. The 3 cylindrical containers, documented in remotely operated vehicle footage, remain the central mystery. Each measures roughly 2 meters long and half a meter in diameter. The construction suggests pressure vessels, or containment units, designed to protect contents from the external environment. Heavy-duty straps had lashed them to the cargo floor, though decades of corrosion have partially disintegrated the bindings. One container broke free during the sinking and now lies on its side against the aft bulkhead. The others remain in position, slowly being consumed by the same corrosion eating through the aircraft's hull. What is inside those containers? The possibilities range from unsettling to catastrophic. The radiation signature suggests nuclear materials, but the isotopes have not been identified. Weapons-grade plutonium or uranium would leave a different decay signature than what was detected. The readings are more consistent with isotopes used in research, medical applications, or weapons development programs. Possibly materials being transported for testing. Possibly components that were never meant to be assembled into finished weapons. Possibly something experimental that no nation wants to acknowledge existed. The environmental monitoring plan is minimal. The International Atomic Energy Agency was briefed on the discovery. They reviewed the radiation data and concluded that the levels detected did not constitute an immediate hazard to marine life or human populations. But no long-term monitoring program was established. No follow-up missions were funded. No environmental impact assessment was conducted. The wreck is in international waters, and no nation wants to take responsibility for a cleanup operation that could cost hundreds of millions of dollars and require technology that barely exists. Marine biologists who studied the initial survey data noted that deep-sea organisms have colonized the wreck. Amphipods, isopods, and other scavengers live in the sediment around the hull. Fish use the structure as shelter. If the containers are leaking, radioactive materials are entering the local ecosystem. The concentrations are likely too low to cause immediate harm. But bioaccumulation is a slow process. Isotopes absorbed by small organisms concentrate as they move up the food chain. Decades from now, commercially caught fish thousands of kilometers away could carry trace contamination that originated from this wreck. And proving the connection would be nearly impossible. The sealed containers are the wild card. If they remain intact, they could theoretically last for centuries. The ocean floor at 4,000 meters is cold, dark, and relatively stable. Corrosion progresses slowly in the absence of oxygen and biological activity. The pressure at that depth actually helps preserve metal structures by compressing the material and reducing stress points. But nothing lasts forever. At some point, the container walls will fail, the seals will breach, and whatever has been trapped inside for 70 years will be released into the surrounding water. A sudden release could create a localized contamination zone that would persist for decades. Or the material could disperse across the ocean floor, carried by deep currents to locations hundreds of kilometers away. Without knowing what isotopes are inside, predicting the environmental impact is impossible. The half-life of the materials matters. Some isotopes decay to safe levels within decades. Others remain hazardous for thousands of years. The only way to know for certain would be to send another ROV mission equipped with sampling tools and gamma-ray spectrometers capable of identifying specific radioactive signatures. That mission would cost millions of dollars. It would require weeks of ship time, specialized equipment, and international cooperation to access the site. And without a nation willing to fund it, the research remains purely speculative. The cargo hold keeps its secrets. Whatever went down with that aircraft in the 1950s or 60s is still down there, slowly corroding, slowly leaking, and no one is watching. Secrets. The ocean keeps the Pacific wreck, sits at 4,000 meters, documented in exquisite detail, and no nation will claim it. The three-dimensional scans exist in academic databases. The radiation data is archived. The measurements and damage analysis are preserved for future researchers. But the questions remain unanswered. What was this aircraft? Where did it come from? What was it carrying? And why will no government acknowledge its existence? The silence. from military archives tells its own story. This was not an accident that was forgotten. This was a mission that was never supposed to be discussed. The serial numbers were removed before the flight. The identification markers were ground off and replaced. The cargo was sealed in pressure vessels and secured with modifications that cost months of engineering work. Someone planned for deniability from the start. And when the aircraft went down, the plan worked exactly as intended. No records, no claims, no responsibility. The ocean is full of machines like this. Operations that failed and disappeared into classified files. Crews who vanished and were written off in reports that will never be declassified. Payloads that were lost and never mentioned again because acknowledging them would raise questions no one wants to answer. This wreck is not unique. It is simply the one that researchers found before anyone could stop them. The families of the crew, if they exist, have no idea their loved ones are down there. The cargo hold continues its slow corrosion, releasing whatever it carried into the cold darkness. And the nations that might know the truth maintain their diplomatic silence. History does not always record what happened. Sometimes the truth rests at depths no light can penetrate, inside machines that were never supposed to be found. And when we do find them, the answers we seek remain locked behind walls of classification that may never come down.